My name is Dana. I'm 27, and for the past 4 years, I have worked as a video editor for a mid-sized digital marketing agency in Austin. I know how content is constructed. I know the difference between a moment that happened and a moment that was built to look like it happened. I know which angles flatten emotion into performance, which lighting set up signal authenticity while manufacturing it, and exactly what a creator sounds like when they are speaking to a camera versus speaking to a person. I know all of that because it is my job to know it. I have spent 4 years in post-production watching raw footage become narrative, watching the space between what was said and what was kept, watching the edit make meaning out of material that didn't have any until someone decided what story to tell. I did not expect to need that knowledge personally. And then my sister Lena posted a 15-second clip of me crying at our father's funeral, set to a trending audio, and captioned it "Grief hits different when it's real," and it reached 2.4 million views in 48 hours. She had filmed it on her phone from across the room. She had not asked me. She had not mentioned it to me. I found out the way her 380,000 followers found out. From the notification that appeared on my phone at 11 at night while I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by my father's things that still smelled like him. Lena thought the distance between Austin and our parents' house in San Antonio was enough that I wouldn't be watching her content closely. She hadn't counted on 2.4 million views generating enough shares that 3 separate people sent it to me before midnight. She hadn't counted on what a video editor does when someone turns her grief into content without her consent. She hadn't counted on the fact that I had been visiting her apartment for her birthday 2 weeks before Dad got sick, that I had my phone, and that I had filmed 40 minutes of footage I had never intended to use. Until now. Welcome to the Family Ledger, where we talk honestly about money, family, and the moments when someone mistakes your pain for their opportunity. If you've ever had someone take something that was yours and dress it up as theirs, this story is for you. Subscribe, drop a comment, and let me start at the beginning. I want to tell you about Lena before I tell you what she did, because who she is matters to the shape of what happened, and because I am trying to tell this honestly, which means telling the parts that are complicated as well as the parts that are clear. Lena is 30, 3 years older than me, and she has been creating content online since she was 25. She started with lifestyle and fashion, the standard entry point, posting outfits and apartment tours and the carefully curated visual grammar of someone building a brand out of their daily life. She was good at it in the way that some people are naturally good at performing authenticity, which is its own specific skill set, and I do not say that dismissively. She understood light. She understood framing. She understood that the gap between what an audience wants to believe is real, and what is real is where attention lies, and she lived in that gap fluently. By year 2, she had 90,000 followers. By year 3, she had 200,002 brand partnerships that paid well enough that she had restructured her life around the content. She quit her part-time marketing job. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment in San Antonio's Southtown neighborhood that she referred to on her platform as a studio, though it was also where she slept and ate and lived. She bought furniture specifically for how it photographed. She arranged her bookshelf not by what she had read, but by what read well on camera. I am not criticizing her for any of that. It is the business. I work in content. I understand the architecture of it without judgment. What I want you to understand is that by the time our father got sick, Lena had been living inside a version of her life that was constructed for an audience for 4 years. The boundary between what she experienced and what she was already framing for content had become, I think, genuinely unclear to her. Not because she was a bad person. Because she had spent 4 years training herself to see her life as material, and that training does not turn off when the material becomes something that should not be material. Our father, Gerald, was 61 when he was diagnosed. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3, found late, the way it is almost always found late. The oncologist was honest about the timeline. 6 to 8 months, he said, if the treatment did what they hoped. He said it in a small office with a window that faced a parking structure and a box of tissues on the corner of his desk that I noticed was positioned very precisely, the way things are positioned when they are used regularly. Dad handled it the way he handled everything. Quietly, practically, without making it larger than it needed to be at any given moment. He updated his will. He had a conversation with me and Lena together about the house and the finances. He planted the spring garden because he said tomatoes wouldn't know the difference, and he didn't see why he should let them down. I moved back to San Antonio for the last 3 months. I requested remote work from my agency, and my manager approved it without hesitation, because she is the kind of manager I hope to be someday. I slept in my childhood bedroom and drove my father to his appointments and sat with him in the evenings watching the documentaries he loved. The ones about ocean ecosystems and engineering projects, the ones that made him ask questions he didn't need answered and comment on things nobody had asked him to comment on. I loved him in the specific and ordinary way you love a parent who showed up consistently for your whole life without requiring credit for it. He was not a complicated man. He was a good one. And watching him get smaller week by week, with the particular precision that disease uses to dismantle a person, was the hardest thing I had done in my adult life. Lena visited twice during the 3 months. Not once for a full week, twice, for long weekends. She filmed both visits. Not the hard parts, the soft parts. The dinner table moments, the backyard afternoon where Dad was having a good day and laughed at something, and she caught it on her phone. She posted 2 of those moments. She framed them as family time, as being present, as cherishing every moment. I watched the posts and felt the thing in my chest that I did not yet have language for, but that my body understood clearly.
I said nothing.
It was her father, too. She was grieving in her own register. I had no right to dictate the register. I told myself that until the funeral clip. I need to tell you about my father's last 2 weeks because the context matters. He came home from the hospital on a Tuesday. He had asked to come home. His oncologist had facilitated the transition to hospice care with the particular efficiency of someone who has done it many times and knows that efficiency is itself a form of kindness in those moments. He had a hospital bed set up in the living room because the stairs had become too much, and he wanted to be near the window that faced the backyard where the tomatoes were coming in. I slept on the couch for 11 nights. I learned to sleep in 3-hour intervals, the way nurses do, attuned to the sounds that required attention and the sounds that didn't. My mother was there. A hospice nurse named Patricia came twice a day. Lena arrived on day 8. She came with a small rolling suitcase and her ring light packed in a separate bag, which I noticed and said nothing about. She sat with Dad for hours that first day, genuinely, holding his hand and talking to him about things from childhood, things that made him smile in the diminished way he still smiled. That was real. I want to be clear that her love for him was real. She did not film those moments. She filmed the ones that looked like the idea of those moments. The golden hour light through the window, the cup of tea on the nightstand, the quilt our grandmother had made. She posted a story series she called Being Here, which collected those images into a sequence that communicated presence and devotion to 380,000 people who could not see the ring light in the guest room or the 3 takes it had required to get the teacup in the right light. I watched from the kitchen doorway. I still said nothing. He was alive. She was here. That was what mattered. He died on a Thursday morning at 6:14. My mother was holding one hand. I was holding the other. The hospice nurse was present. Lena was asleep in the guest room and woke to my mother's voice and came in after. The funeral was 4 days later. It was a small service, the way Dad had wanted it. 40 people who had actually known him. His coworkers from the engineering firm where he had worked for 22 years. His neighbors. His fishing friends. The woman from his book club who always brought the best snacks and cried at everything and whom he had always found deeply reassuring as a result. I spoke. I had written something over 2 days that tried to be accurate about who he was. Not sentimental in the way eulogies can drift towards sentiment and lose the person in the process. I talked about the documentaries. I talked about the tomatoes. I talked about the way he approached problems, any problem, with the same measured inventory of what was actually known versus what was being assumed, and how that had been the most useful thing he had ever taught me without teaching it directly. I cried at the end. Not performed crying. The kind that arrives when you have been holding something, and the holding finally exceeds the capacity and the body simply decides. Lena filmed it from across the room. The notification arrived at 11:17 that night. Text from my college roommate, Priya. She had sent a link with no message, just the link, and I knew from the way she had sent it that she was not sure how I would receive it. I clicked it. 15 seconds. Me at the podium, the moment the crying started, Lena's trending audio underneath it, 2.4 million views, 47,000 comments that were mostly sympathetic to Lena for the tragedy she was experiencing, for how hard it was, for how real her grief looked. Her grief. I read that caption again. Grief hits different when it's real. I set my phone on the nightstand. I looked at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom for a while. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment. Not the performed version, but the actual version. It was not rage. Not immediately. It was something quieter and more specific. the feeling of being used as material, of having the most private moment I had experienced that year compressed into 15 seconds and set to audio and given to strangers as evidence of someone else's depth. My grief, in Lena's caption, had become her authenticity. My face, crying at my father's funeral, was the content that would drive her next brand partnership negotiation because it proved she was real. I turned the light off. I went to sleep, or into the closest thing to sleep available to me at that point. In the morning, I texted Lena and asked her to take it down. She called me back in 20 minutes. She said she understood why I was upset, but the response had been incredible. The comments were so supportive, people were really connecting with it. It was bringing awareness to grief and family, and she thought Dad would have wanted people to feel seen. I said, Lena, take it down. She said, I really think you should see the comments before you decide. People are sending so much love. I said, it's my face. I did not consent to it. Take it down. A pause. Then she said she would think about it. She did not take it down. Here is where I need to tell you about the birthday visit, because that is the part of the story Lena had forgotten about entirely. 2 weeks before Dad's diagnosis, I had driven to San Antonio for Lena's 30th birthday. She was throwing herself a birthday dinner at her apartment, 8 friends, a charcuterie setup she had assembled specifically for content, and a flower arrangement she had received as a gifted partnership with a local florist. I arrived 2 hours early because she had asked me to help set up. I helped set up. I also, because I was bored while she was on a call, and because my professional habit is to notice light and framing, filmed about 40 minutes of footage on my phone. Not to use, just to have. The way people in production fields film things reflexively, the way writers carry notebooks, because the practice is embedded. What I filmed was the infrastructure behind the content. The dinner table set twice, first in the configuration that would photograph well, and then rearranged into the one where 8 people could actually eat. The conversation Lena had on the phone with her brand manager about whether to mention the partnership in the post or let it seem organic. The moment she told her friend Cassie the flower arrangement was gifted, but Cassie should act natural if it came up on camera because organic reactions performed better. The 3 takes of the birthday candle blowing. The first 2, the light was wrong. And the third one, she laughed authentically and she said to her friend, that's the one. That's usable. The food on the charcuterie board that had been staged for the flat lay and then reconstructed from a different board for actual eating, because the first one had the wrong cheese to cracker ratio for visual balance. The caption she wrote for the birthday post. The first draft said best night surrounded by the people I love most. The second draft said 30 feels like finally arriving. The third draft said turning 30 with my whole heart full, which is the one she posted, and she said to Cassie after she decided, that's the one that gets saved. None of it was malicious. None of it was even unusual by the standards of the content industry. I watched it all with the same professional detachment I brought to any raw footage. I filmed it and I kept it, and I had never thought about using it for anything. Until the funeral clip. If you've ever held something in reserve, not knowing why, and then found out why, leave a comment. Tell me what that moment of recognition felt like. And if you haven't subscribed to the Family Ledger yet, do it now. Because what I did with that footage and how I did it is the part of this story I thought about most carefully before I acted. I want to be honest with you about the ethics of what I did, because I think the honest version is the one worth telling, and because I believe you are owed the complicated parts, not just the satisfying ones. I did not hack anything. I did not expose anything private, nothing from her DMs, nothing from closed conversations, nothing filmed in a space where she had a reasonable expectation of privacy. Everything I filmed was at a dinner party I had been invited to in common spaces without concealment. I had simply kept it. I also want to be clear about what I chose not to do. I did not post the footage deceptively. I did not manufacture a narrative around it. I did not add voiceover that misrepresented context. I edited it into a 7-minute video that showed exactly what it showed, the behind-the-scenes process of building content that presents itself as spontaneous, and I posted it to my own channel under the title. A video editor watches her influencer sister prep for a birthday post, and I let the footage speak for itself. I sent Lena a message 30 minutes before I posted it. I said, I asked you to take down the funeral clip. You didn't. I'm posting something tomorrow. I wanted you to know first. She called immediately. She was not the version of Lena I had spoken to on the phone after the funeral clip. She was the version that appeared when something was actually at stake. Precise, fast, and momentarily without the performance layer. She said, Dana, don't do this. She said that footage was private. I said it was filmed at a dinner party I attended. She said, you know what I mean. I said, I know you mean it would be inconvenient. That's different from private. She said, this will hurt my career. I said, posting my face at Dad's funeral without asking me hurt something too. A long silence. She said, I'll take the funeral clip down right now. Right now. Tonight. Just don't post that. I said, take it down. I'll consider the rest. She took it down within 15 minutes. I saw the notification that the post had been removed. I held the decision for 24 hours, which I had promised myself I would do before doing anything I couldn't undo. At the end of 24 hours, I posted the video. I want to tell you what I expected and what actually happened because they were different. I expected a moderate response. A few thousand views from people in my niche. Some conversation in the content creator community. Maybe a few think pieces. I was a small creator. I had 4,000 followers. I did not expect the video to travel outside my lane. It traveled outside my lane. By the end of the first day, it had 180,000 views. By the end of the second day, it had 600,000. By the end of the week, it had 1.4 million. The content creator community picked it up first, then the commentary channels, then mainstream social media accounts that aggregate drama content. The video was being discussed in spaces I had never been part of and had not anticipated reaching. Lena's comment section on all of her posts became a reference to the video. Her engagement dropped sharply. 2 of her 3 active brand partnerships contacted her within the week. 1 suspended the partnership pending a review. 1 ended it. The 3rd posted a statement that they were committed to authentic creator relationships and were evaluating their partnerships in light of recent conversations in the industry. Her DMs, which she told me about in a phone call she made from a place past strategy and arriving somewhere raw, were running roughly 60% supportive and 40% critical. She had lost 12,000 followers in 5 days. She called me on day 4. She said, "You're ruining my career." She said it with the particular anguish of someone whose career and identity are the same thing, for whom the professional damage is not separable from the personal damage. I heard that in her voice, and I want to be honest that it was nothing to me. She is my sister. Her pain is nothing to me. I said, "Lena, I asked you to take down the funeral clip. I asked once on the phone, and you told me you would think about it. That was the moment." She said, "I took it down when you asked the second time." I said, "The second time I had to have something to trade for it." She didn't answer. I said, "What you posted was my grief, not yours. Mine. At my father's funeral. Without asking. For 2.4 million strangers." And the caption said, "Grief hits different when it's real." That was my real. You made it yours. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different. The strategy was gone. What was left was something I hadn't heard from Lena in years. Maybe not since we were teenagers and she had a bad night and came to sit on the edge of my bed and didn't say anything for a long time. She said, "I didn't think about how it would feel to you. I just saw the moment, and I knew it would land, and I posted it before I thought about what it was." I said, "I know." She said, "I do that." She wasn't explaining it away. She was saying it the way you say something when you have just understood it clearly for the first time. I trained myself to see everything as material, and sometimes I forget where the edges are. I said, "Dad's funeral is past the edges." She said, "Yes. I know that now." We sat on the phone for a while without talking. Not the comfortable silence. The kind where 2 people are sitting on either side of something that happened, and neither of them knows yet what the ground looks like going forward. But they are still on the phone, which means something. The brand partnership that ended did not come back. The one that was suspended came back 3 weeks later with a revised contract that included a content review clause. The 3rd stayed through the review period and said nothing further publicly. Lena lost 18,000 followers over 2 weeks and regained about 9,000 of them over the following month. Her overall engagement, according to a creator analytics account that was tracking the situation as a case study, stabilized lower than it had been before, but was recovering. She posted 1 video about the situation herself. It was not the performed accountability post that content creators sometimes produce as reputation management. I watched it closely because I know what that looks like from the inside, and this was not it. She sat in her apartment without the ring light, with the overhead lighting that is not flattering, and she talked for 9 minutes about the things she had said to me on the phone. That she had trained herself to see her life as material and had lost track of where that ended and where the people in her life began. She did not mention my name. She did not mention the video I had posted. She talked about her father. She talked about the habit she had built and the way it had cost her something more important than the followers or the partnerships. She said she was going to spend some time figuring out what she actually wanted to document and why. It had 400,000 views. The comments were different from her usual comments. Slower, more personal, the kind of engagement that comes when people feel like they are being spoken to rather than performed at. I watched it twice. Then I texted her and said that was real. She wrote back, "Working on it." My own channel grew from 4,000 to 87,000 followers in the month after the video. I had not expected that. I had not been building an audience. I had simply posted one video and not planned further. But the messages I received in those weeks were the thing that surprised me most. Not the messages about Lena, though there were thousands of those. The messages from other people who worked behind the scenes of content creation, editors, photographers, assistants, family members who had watched people they knew or worked for construct the version of their lives that went public and had felt the particular dissonance of knowing the gap between the version and the reality. And messages from people who were not in the industry at all, who had a family member or a friend who had used something private, a hard moment, a vulnerable conversation, a piece of their actual life, as content. Who had felt the thing I felt and not known what to do about it and had been grateful someone had named it. I had not intended to start a conversation. I had intended to say, this is what you filmed, and this is what it cost me, in the language I knew how to speak, which is the language of footage. The conversation started anyway. I want to tell you about my father's tomatoes because I think they belong in this story. He had planted them in March, 2 weeks before the diagnosis, and he tended them through the first month of treatment with the same stubborn calendar he applied to everything. By the time he came home from the hospital, he could not manage the garden himself, and I started doing it, guided by his instructions from the living room window, which he delivered with the precision of someone who had been doing it for 30 years and found my amateur attempts both touching and concerning. Too much water, he said. You're drowning them. I said I was following what it said online. He said the internet has never grown a tomato in its life. I adjusted. They came in August, 6 weeks after he died, heavy and red and more than I could eat alone. I brought some to the neighbors. I brought some to Patricia, the hospice nurse, when she came by to see how my mother was doing. I saved some for Lena when she came to visit in September, the first visit after the phone call, the one where we sat in the backyard and talked for a long time about things we had not talked about before. She held a tomato in her hand and looked at the garden and said he would have been so annoyed that they came in this well when you did it. I said he really would have. She said, I'm going to try not to film this. She said it half as a joke and half as a statement of actual intent, and I appreciated both halves. I said, you can if you want. It's a good garden. She didn't. She just sat there, and we ate tomatoes in the backyard, and the late summer light came down through the big oak tree, and it was, in the way that the simplest things sometimes are after the hardest things, exactly enough. Here is what I know after all of it. There is a version of this story where I am the villain, where I use my professional skills and my access to private footage to damage my sister's career because she hurt me. I have read that version in some of the comment sections, and I have thought about it honestly rather than dismissing it, because I think you should engage with the uncomfortable version of your own choices. What I come back to is this. I filmed that footage in a space I was invited into. I posted it without fabrication or deception. I gave her notice before I posted it, and I posted it only after she declined to take down the funeral clip when I asked her once without leverage. She could have taken it down the first time I asked. That was the moment where the paths split. I am not saying I was without power in what happened. I had the footage, and I chose to use it, and that was a decision with consequences I was responsible for. What I am saying is that I made that decision in response to something that was done to me first, without my consent, on the worst day of my year. And I made it in the only language Lena understood at the time. Not words. Not a phone call. Content. The language got through. What I want to say to you, if you are watching someone treat your real life as their raw material, is that you are allowed to name it. You are allowed to say this is mine and you did not have the right to take it. You are allowed to say that love and consent are not mutually exclusive, that loving someone does not grant them access to your worst moments without your permission. Your grief is not content. Your pain is not someone else's authenticity proof. Your face at your father's funeral belongs to you, and the number of views it generates does not change whose it is. That's my story. A 15-second clip, 40 minutes of forgotten footage, and a sister who is learning, slowly, that the most real things in her life are the ones she puts down the phone for. If this found you at the right moment, share it with someone who has felt their own life turn into material without their permission. Drop a comment. Tell me if someone has ever used your pain as their content. I read every one. Subscribe to the Family Ledger. I'll see you in the next story.